Thank you, Boyd.
Thank you very much for that, Mario, for that wonderful introduction. As Mario said, I'm work at ABRI in Australia. I'm actually a proud Kiwi, and you may have come across some of my work in extension. I also do a number of breed plan runs, and I also work in the development of selection indexes, as we mentioned. Now, before I just go off talking about myself, in fact, I want to stop talking about myself as soon as possible. I also want to mention that we have Fiona MacArthur online tonight as well, who's another member of the ABRI Extension team as well. So if we have any really difficult questions, I'll be certainly directing them her direction instead of my own.
Thanks, Boyd. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Lovely to have you all online.
You're very quiet there, Fiona.
Volumes up as much as possible, but nice to be here. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Continuing on. So what I'm going to cover tonight is I'm very briefly going to cover what are selection indexes. I'm going to talk a bit about the science behind them. Why are they so complicated, and why have we made them so complicated? And then we're going to talk about a best practice guide to using selection indexes. Now, you may notice throughout the presentation, there's going to be a few QR codes like we have down the bottom right-hand side of the screen. That's links to tip sheets and videos on that we have on the Breed Plan website. So the one that you can see there on this screen is going to take you to that tip sheet that is pictured there, and that's the Breed Plan Guide to Selection Indexes. So in Southern Africa, we currently have 12 different selection indexes available for 5 different Southern African breeds, and they are listed here on the screen. So not everyone has them. That is certainly a long-term goal to work towards that. And yeah, in time, hopefully we will get there. Now, if you want more detail on any of those selection indexes, we strongly advise you to go to the Help Centre on the Breed Plan website, again via the QR code. You'll see something like we have on the screen here that lists all the selection indexes for the different breed societies, and you can find out more information. We haven't got time to go through all 12 tonight, and it wouldn't be relevant, only a couple of them would be relevant to each person. So we're just going to talk in general terms about things tonight. So selection indexes, what are they? Well, they're like EBVs. They're a science-based, well-established selection tool that is used in most livestock species around the world. They provide an overall score of an animal's genetic value for profit for a specific production system. And for breed plan, that it's in the units of net profit per cow mated. So for South Africa, obviously that's going to be in rand. For where we are here in Australia or New Zealand, we go in dollars, and for our UK clients, we're in pounds. Now, one thing that selection indexes are not, and that is not the only selection tool that should be utilised. Many reasons for that. Some important traits are not currently included in the indexes, things like structure, docility, etc. And we also acknowledge that these are breed society selection indexes that are based off average production systems, and individual farms are going to differ and therefore have, may want custom breeding objectives for themselves. Therefore, we advise selection indexes to be used in conjunction with individual EBVs of importance and other important sources of information like visual assessment. And this is all covered in the Breed Plan Guide to Animal Selection. And again, I will cover this in that best practice guide at the end of this presentation. So going on to the science behind breed plan selection indexes. They're created by a piece of software called Breed Object, which is short for breeding objective. And it's the most advanced selection index software in the beef world. It utilizes all known sources of costs and income alongside world-leading scientific research to create the indexes. And it produces production-specific selection indexes to account for variation in farming location environments. So some people would, and a geneticist would call that G by E, or genotype by environmental interaction. Where it also accounts for variation in existing production levels. So, what you may want to make genetic progress in is going to depend on whether you're already a high performing herd or a low performing herd. That's going to influence things. And also market endpoints is going to influence the selection indexes. And, why do these things matter? Well, direction is important because, a genetic evaluation like breed plan can make genetic change relatively easy to achieve. But genetic progress is actually what we desire. We actually want to improve things, not just change things in a random direction. So to do that, the indexes use profit because we regard that as the universal driver in beef production. Now, this can contradict producer opinions of what traits are important, but the reality is profit is constant, and opinions, every person has one, and they don't always agree or rarely agree. And you can still account for non-profit derived breeding objectives still via those other selection tools, as I mentioned earlier, using EBVs of importance, visual appraisal, etc. Selection indexes offer balanced selection across the whole production system. Each selection index needs to consider all aspects of the production system to avoid neglecting traits that are not immediately relevant to the user. Relevant traits are given appropriate weightings for maximum profitability, even if the appropriate weightings are not obvious. And I've got some examples of this on subsequent slides, which you will see. Now, part of the reason why it's important to consider the whole production system is which traits are important are going to depend on the production system. So, some key defining parameters include things like, are you retaining heifers? Because if you aren't retaining heifers, then you don't need to consider any of the maternal traits because, you aren't breeding daughters to retain in your herd and breed from. So that plays an important role. Are the bulls used in straight or crossbreeding? If they're in crossbreeding, we have to account for the effects of hybrid vigor and what effects that has on subsequent production. What is the market endpoint? Are you selling as weaners, or are you taking them right through to finishing after a feedlot? That's important. Are the premiums for carcass quality? I know it's been certainly a topic of debate in Southern Africa, whether the possibility of introducing these. We certainly have them here in Australia and New Zealand. That plays an important role in defining your breeding objective. And the other one is, are you getting rewarded for sustainability or not? Because that can greatly influence your breeding objectives too. So if you fail to account for all the relevant traits, what you risk is undesirable movements in traits that you haven't monitored. And there's a classic example of this, and that would be the fertility response in the early production indexes in dairy cattle. They weren't really true selection indexes because they didn't account for the whole production system. They only really were interested in how much milk they could get out of each cow. So they were breeding along those lines for, into the 1990s. You can see here on this graph where we've got, you can see the trend coming down here. The trend going up. That's the milk production and milk quality traits that they had in the Holsteins in the United States of America. Now, this happened worldwide as well. But while they were chasing that, they had a correlated response in fertility that went down. And the, typical dairy herds their fertility went through the floor. And it was only when they started realizing in the mid-90s that they'd created a problem and created true selection indexes that also included fertility, that they were actually able to start improving both. And this is why the breed object software models everything from conception to death for every animal to capture the influence of all the relevant traits. We've got another example here. Now, this is a Southern African breed. It's a Bos Taurus breed. I haven't identified it. And we've got the graph on the left. This is what would happen if you concentrated your selection on growth, primarily 400-day weight in this case. You can see, birth weight goes up, calving ease decreases, so you're going to have more calving difficulty. You're going to see mature cow weight goes up quite strongly as well, so those larger cows are going to be eating more. You're going to see is only a small gain in days to calving, so negative days to calving is what you're after. So you want it to decrease and go into negative numbers. As you can see, just chasing growth isn't going to deliver all the traits that you want. So we've got a self-replacing index for this particular breed. Yes, you won't make as much progress in growth, but you are going to make progress in your calving ease and your fertility, your days to calving EBV. Now, if I go on to a second example, this is a Bos Indicus breed, again from Southern Africa. If they were to select purely for fertility, so days to calving in this example, that really pushes fat up. You're not getting much growth in it, and your net feed intake's also gone positive, which is undesirable. Whereas if you're going for the self-replacing index for this particular breed, you're going to get a bit more growth. You're not going to get as much days to calving, but it's more balanced, and you're going to have your rib and rump fats held to slightly negative for that. So it's a lot more balanced selection to use the selection index. And I mentioned different market endpoints. It's important to realize that in a self-replacing production system, there are potentially 3 different market endpoints for the progeny that are produced. So we have the steers that end up going to market. Then we also have the heifers that we intend to retain for breeding. So for them, maternal traits are important. But then there's also going to be the surplus heifers that are also going to go to market as well, because you're not going to, in most situations, you're not going to need to retain all of your heifers for breeding. So there'll always be some going off to market. Now, we know there's a thing called sexual dimorphism where males tend to grow faster and be leaner than their sisters. Well, we've got that, but that's compounded by the fact that the best heifers are actually going to be retained in the herd too. So there's going to be quite a bit of difference between the fast, lean steers that are being turned off and the non-best heifers. So they're probably going to be the slower growing heifers who are already slower than males anyway growing, who are going to be going to the market as well. So there's going to be quite a bit of difference between 1 and 3 there. So, yeah, there can be considerable differences between the steers and heifers that are sent to market, and therefore different market specifications may indeed be targeted for each of them. Another factor that we need to account for in selection indexes is non-linearity. Now, ideally, we'd go, 1 unit increase in a trait will always result in X rands more profit. 1 kilo more of weight will always be, 74 Rand or more profit or whatever. Unfortunately, life isn't always like that. Meat companies have market specifications and therefore apply discounts for animals that are outside of those specifications. And a trait can also have multiple influences on profitability as well, which can also make their influence be non-linear. We also have correlated responses to traits. So no trait is inherent in isolation. We know that if we're going to be, for instance, selecting for more growth, as we talked about before, we're going to see a rise in birth weight and a decrease in calving ease. These correlated responses occur. And this also occurs for traits where no EBV is reported. So this may be an EBV that's not reported due to a lack of records. So a number of breeds don't have the calving ease EBV, even though it's important. They just don't have enough information for breed plan to analyse. Or it might be an EBV that is under development. And an example of this is cow body condition score. So cow body condition score, I just want to spend a fraction of time discussing it. It's actually negatively correlated with milk EBV. So the more a cow milks, or more it contributes to its calf while it's on it, it actually takes body condition score off the cow. So that's a bit of a negative, because the reality, cow body condition score is positively correlated with cow fertility and longevity. So a cow that puts more into its calf is actually likely to be a cow that doesn't live as long or be as fertile. So that, very important to consider all of that when creating our indexes, which we do. And we currently do have the cow body condition score EBV under development, and we encourage people to please submit the data with your mature cow weights if you have it. Now, accounting for correlated traits is only possible because breed plan is one of the few beef genetic evaluations around the world that includes all quantitative traits in a single analysis. So what that means is that we analyse fertility in the same analysis as growth, and in the same analysis as the carcass traits. A lot of different analyses will analyse these separately, and therefore they don't capture these correlations in their indexes accurately. Now, feed intake is another thing that Breed Object really excels at how it handles it. I mean, it's the only selection index software that fully accounts for feed costs. And yes, Johan, it still hasn't been done. And yes, I have complained about it. It is not yet included in our EBV emphasis graphs, the EBV. And yes, we are working on it, but it's not there yet. But feed intake, this includes accounting for variation in net feed intake due to changes in body composition that occurs with age and production stage. So we know that, for instance, a yearling calf, he's a yearling steer, he'll be mainly putting on lean muscle at that stage. But 6 months later, he's going to be starting to deposit a fair amount of fat. And fat is a lot more energy intensive than lean muscle. So it really affects the feed intake that's required at that time. And we also know the cost of feed changes throughout the year as well. So we've got to account for that cost, particularly when we know that the amount of feed required is also changing throughout the year. Another key thing about selection indexes is we really need to breed for the future. So if a selection decision is made and a calf is conceived today, so we make a selection decision today using a selection index, and we go out and we load the AI pipette and inseminate a cow. Calf is conceived today. we have to wait until that calf is born before we first get to see the genetics for the birth traits. So it's the first time those genetics is actually expressed. So we've had to wait, 280 odd days before that they're expressed for the first time. Then it's only after that we actually start to see the growth in carcass genetics start to be expressed in the following months and years. And then daughters will be 2 to 3 years of age before they express their maternal genetics for the first time. So, we're talking, 3 or 4 years since that calf was conceived before it in turn is having calves itself and on the ground, and we're seeing those maternal genetics being expressed. So we've got to look to the future and anticipate future requirements for when these traits will be expressed. We need to anticipate future prices where possible. That's why we need a crystal ball. I really do wish we had one, but we do our best. But that's what it is. So just to summarize some of these key scientific concepts, the direction of change is critical. We want to be making genetic progress, just not genetic change. Profit is a universal driver in beef production. We need to consider all relevant traits and the relationships between them, and we need to breed for the future. Now, I haven't listed all the concepts of scientific concepts and economic concepts that are important for selection indexes in this webinar. It just would take too long and go into too much detail. But you can rest assured that BreedObject is the most advanced selection index software in the world, and the complexity is required to ensure that each selection index moves your herd in a positive direction. Now, I actually wanted to talk about the milk EBV here and how it works in selection indexes. And the reason I wanted to do that is it's a good example of some of the considerations that apply to a individual EBV in a selection index. So the milk EBV provides an estimate of the maternal genetic contribution of a dam to the 200-day weight of her calf. So the higher the milk EBV, the heavier your calves, the more profit. Big smile, huh? Nice and simple, but I do hate that word. Reality does bite us sometimes. If I was to ask you, which do you think requires more feed? 1 kilo of calf growth that is from direct to the calf, so it's from its 200-day weight EBV, or is it 1 kilo of calf growth from their dam via the milk EBV? To me, it's quite simple. One has a middleman, one is direct. And the moment you have a middleman involved, or in this case, the middle cow involved, you've got to factor in her inefficiencies as well. And therefore, achieving 1 kilo growth from the milk EBV is going to cost you more nutritionally than it will cost you direct to calf. So if you had a preference on selecting 1 kilo more 200-day weight or 1 kilo more milk EBV, on that basis, I'd certainly go with the 200-day weight EBV. Now, there's also a factor of genetic variation. So I've got 5, again, de-identified cattle breeds from Southern Africa here. These are separate analyses, so breed comparison's not possible. But if you look at the first 2 columns here this is the top 1% of the breed versus the top 99% of the breed for the 200-day weight EBV. And you go down here, you can see there's from 15 to 28 kilos difference between the top 1% to the top 99%. So it's quite a bit of variation there that we can select on, genetic variation to select on. If we look at the milk EBV for the same animals, the difference goes from 8 to 5 kilos. Oh, sorry, 10 to 5 kilos. There's a lot more variation in the 200-day weight EBV than in the milk EBV, so it's a lot easier to make genetic progress out of the 200-day weight EBV than it is the milk. There's also correlations with other traits, and I referred to it there when I was talking about body condition scores. High milk EBVs are associated with lower cow body condition score, and lower body condition scores are associated with lower fertility. And back to that same graph I mentioned earlier that showed exactly that as milk increased, fertility went down, unless it was also selected upon. And it's also associated, lower body condition score is associated with decreased cow longevity. And this is why we see a negative emphasis on milk in most self-replacing selection indexes. And I refer back to slide 11 when I said that the emphasis in a selection index may contradict producer opinions of which traits are important, because if you're sitting there and you're looking at, I want another kilo of weaning weight, give me more milk, but in the overall complete picture of your whole production system, you actually want less, and it will earn you more money. So moving on to the best practice guide to animal selection and using selection indexes. So this is called the Breed Plan Guide to Animal Selection on the Breed Plan website if you go there. And it's a 4-step process. Select the selection index of most relevance to you, use it to rank the animals, then consider individual EBVs, and then consider other information. So choosing which selection index to use, it's important that you choose the selection index that represents the production system that most closely matches that of your herd or the herds of your bull buying customers. This includes breed, because all selection indexes are breed specific, and we do that just to make sure they are optimized for individual breeds, and also the EBVs they work off are breed specific as well. Don't choose or compare selection indexes based on the magnitude of a selection index value. So if you see one has higher RAND values than another, that doesn't mean it's better. The one that's better for you is going to be based on the one that most closely matches your production system. So once you have chosen your selection index, if you're doing it online, you can go in and you can click on the selection index, and if you've got a bunch of animals that you've searched up, and it will automatically rank those animals based on that selection index if you do that. The other thing you can do with a selection index is you can use it to establish the relative value of an animal. So if you had 2 bulls at a sale and bull A has a index value of 60 Rand, bull B has an index value of 30 Rand, that's a 30 Rand difference between them. What we expect the difference in net profit from the progeny is half the difference in index values. So there'd be half times 60 minus 30, which comes out at that 30 I talked about. That would mean 15 Rand per cow mated is what we would expect bull A to be worth to you compared to bull B. Now, you may be wondering why we have this half factor in the equation. We have that there because only half of the progeny's genes come from the sire. The other half, of course, comes from the dam. This is the same logic that we use with EBVs to determine the relative difference in genetic merit for a given trait. So once we've used the selection index to rank animals and maybe get a bit of a short list, we recommend considering individual EBVs for the animal. Now we've got three animals on the screen here. You may notice these are three genuine animals from a national show and sale here in Australia, and they had the same index value. But you may notice that the EBVs are actually quite different within the animals. How they get to that index value varies between each of them. So where one might be poor, say bull A is reasonably poor for calving ease at -5, he compensates by having better growth to get to the same value. Whereas bull C, he's better for calving ease, but he's got poorer growth, so he loses out a wee bit there and ends up at the same value. Now, this is why individual EBVs are important. You might be looking at these three bulls and going, all right, they've made it into my short list. Which one do I want to take home? Now, that might depend. If you're mating mainly heifers, you'll be looking at bull C because you want that extra calving ease, the lighter birth weight, etc. And because you happen to be mating mainly heifers. But if you're taking the bull home and you're going, well, he'll be going out mainly with my mature cows, you might be quite willing to look at bull A or B because you know you've got experienced breeding cows who can handle and a calf that's a bit heavier and may not be as good a shape as would have come out of bull from bull C. So this is where it's important to consider the individual EBVs to personalize your selection decisions for your farm. Then we've got other traits of importance. Now these they're certainly not fourth on the list because they're the least important. They're as vital as any of the others, if not more vital. They're only fourth because the other steps can all be done pre-sale, whereas some of these need visual appraisal, so you might need to see the animal. No animal is of any value to a breeding herd if it's infertile or structurally flawed. So other traits of importance include visual assessment, including your structure and temperament, bull fertility, pedigree, so you can try and avoid inbreeding, and DNA test results if relevant and available for you. And just before I finish, one final slide. One final thing you can actually use selection indexes for is they can actually provide an indication of which traits have the most value to record and submit to breed plan. If you record traits, you're going to make more you're going to have more accurate EBVs, which is going to allow you to make more genetic progress. Therefore, if a trait's really important in the selection index, it's really important to the financial outcomes of the herd. And those are the traits that are really important to record to make the most genetic progress.